Hey heroes, and welcome to another incredible episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. The Fantastic Four is a group we've talked about several times on the channel before. When scientist Reed Richards, his best friend Ben Grimm, fiancée Susan Storm, and her hot-headed brother Johnny attempted a historic space flight, the foursome were bombarded with mysterious cosmic rays that endowed them with uncanny superhuman abilities. Deciding to use their powers for the good of mankind, they stayed together as the Fantastic Four and became the first publicly known superheroes of the Marvel Age. This week's tale is not about them. Instead, we'll be turning our attention towards a similar rocket launch being conducted in the American Southwest. Here we meet Simon Utrecht, a wealthy industrialist, former politician, and business rival to Tony Stark. With him was his lover, Anne Darnell, who was an expert in life support systems. There was also Anne's brother, Jimmy Darnell, a fuel propulsion engineer. And finally, we have professional pilot and scientist Michael Steele. You see, Simon Utrecht was a man with a lust for power that could not be satisfied through economic or political means, and plotted to recreate the accident that empowered the Fantastic Four. He shared this desire with Anne and Jimmy, who both insisted on using their expertise to join him. Mike Steele was brought on to design and build the ship they'd be using, but he wasn't told the full scope of their plans until it was ready to launch. Utrecht offered Steele a chance to join them, explaining that he could find another pilot if Mike was afraid. Striking the desk in frustration, Mike Steele declared that he wasn't afraid of anything and agreed to fly the ship. Ironically, this is very similar to what happened when Ben Grimm decided to pilot the Marvel 1 for Reed Richards, but with a very important difference. Whereas Grimm was concerned that their radiation shielding was insufficient to protect them from the unknown effects of cosmic rays, Steele had been instructed to design Utrecht's ship with as little shielding as possible, to give them an even larger dose of radiation. And so this foursome waited until the conditions were right and the intensity of cosmic rays were at their peak. Launching from the New Mexico desert, they intentionally flew directly into the cosmic storm, and sure enough, the radiation easily penetrated their ship's hull. As the rays passed through the crew, Jimmy Darnell's body began to glow with power. Mike Steele grew heavier and found himself unable to stand as he was pressed against the floor of the ship. And Darnell stumbled backwards into the life support systems, cracking cylinders of gases that flooded her spacesuit and entered her lungs. And Simon Utrecht, who was still connected to the ship's flight computer, felt his mind being flooded with data. Meanwhile, their rocket launch was witnessed by scientist Bruce Banner, who found himself near the launch site after once again changing back from his alter ego, the Incredible Hulk. Investigating the base, he found the facility empty, save for the computers that were monitoring and recording the flight. Taking notice of the lethal radiation levels, Banner attempted to save the crew by remotely reprogramming their flight path. He brought the rocket back down to Earth, but the re-entry system failed, causing the ship to crash in a fiery explosion. But from the wreckage emerged Utrecht and his crew, who had indeed been altered by the cosmic radiation, both in appearance and ability. Simon gained the power to telekinetically repel objects with considerable force, controlling their speed and direction, and took the name Vector. And Darnell was transformed into Vapor, and gained the ability to convert her body into a wide variety of gases. Having taken a large metallic form after merging with some of the ship's mass, Mike Steele became ironclad, and in addition to superhuman strength and durability, possessed the power to increase his weight without altering his size. And finally, Jimmy Darnell was converted into living energy with the power to project hard radiation from his body and became known as X-Ray. Electing to use their powers solely for selfish purposes, this foursome stood in opposition to the rest of humanity, and thus Ironclad dubbed them the U-Foes in honor of Simon Utrecht. They also begrudged the fact that Banner had prevented them from absorbing as much cosmic radiation as they initially planned, and tried to kill him. Suffice it to say, they didn't recognize him at first, but that quickly changed when Banner transformed once again into the Incredible Hulk. The U-Foes tried to battle the Green Goliath, but their inexperience both as a team and in the use of their powers caused them to get in each other's way. Furthermore, the increasing intensity of their abilities proved to be their own undoing. Ironclad couldn't stop his mass from increasing and began to sink into the earth. Vector, meanwhile, found himself unable to get close to his beloved as his powers pushed her away. Not only that, but he began deflecting the air around him, preventing him from even breathing. At the same time, Vapor couldn't maintain her human form as the wind began to blow her apart. While she began to disperse, Vector made another attempt to reach her, only to collapse from lack of oxygen. Ironically, as he fell forward, his power to repel objects caused his own body to launch upward away from the ground. And while all that was happening, X-Ray felt like he was being poisoned by his own radiation, as his body was racked with unbearable pain. Burning out, he fled by launching himself into the upper atmosphere, where it seemed he was doomed to continue experiencing a living death. However, fate had other plans, and as he teetered on the edge of space, X-Ray absorbed enough ambient cosmic rays to stabilize and gain control over his powers. He sought out his allies, starting with his sister Vapor, and was able to blast her with cosmic radiation, endowing her with similar control. She then found Vector and saved his life by enveloping him in an oxygen cloud until X-Ray was able to stabilize him as well. Ironclad was a bit more of an issue as he had sunk deep beneath the surface of the Earth where the intense heat and pressure smoothed out and polished his metal form. However, by bombarding the spot where he'd begun sinking with cosmic radiation, X-Ray was able to grant him control over his powers as well. Ironclad eventually emerged from the ground and returned to Utrecht Industries, hoping the others had also survived. Sure enough, Vector, Vapor, and X-Ray soon met him there, and the U-Foes were reunited. Seeking revenge, they launched another attack on Bruce Banner, who, during this time, had succeeded in gaining control over his Hulk form. However, with his newfound mastery over his abilities, X-Ray succeeded in blasting the Hulk with gamma-negative radiation, forcing the Green Goliath to revert to human form and allowing Vapor to easily knock him out. Taking him captive, the U-Foes hijacked the airwaves and announced their intentions to execute Banner on live TV. Many heroes around the globe witnessed this broadcast, including the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, and Alpha Flight, and while there were those who wanted to help, none were able to track the signal to its source. This was because of Vector's powers, who even reflected Doctor Strange's spells, preventing him from locating them. However, Banner's abduction was witnessed by three of his allies, Rick Jones, Betty Ross, and Barit, the latter of which was a techno artist from the planet Krylor, but perhaps that's a story for another day. The important thing for today is that she had a variety of robotic creations that kept the U-Foes distracted while the trio succeeded in freeing the Hulk. While not actively being bombarded by negative gamma, Banner was able to transform yet again and bound X-Ray in a radiation-absorbing energy grid. The Hulk then used Ironclad and Vapor against one another, throwing the former into the latter when she converted her body into a corrosive acidic gas. At Vector's insistence, Vapor then transformed into an anesthetic gas and stayed by Ironclad to numb his pain. This left Vector to challenge the Hulk alone using his telekinetic repulsion ability. However, as impressive as it was, that was a power that the Hulk was able to overcome through sheer strength and force of will. Pushing his way through the torrents of debris, the Jade Giant crushed Vector's hands, ending the fight. This time the U-Foes were taken into custody and held without a trial in a specially designed facility in the Nevada desert, where a null field neutralized their abilities. Having not yet been charged with an actual crime, Vector and his lawyer, Henry Price Claringer, argued that their imprisonment was illegal. The Justice Department, however, had frozen Utrecht's assets and intended on using a long, drawn-out trial period to pressure the U-Foes into signing a plea deal that would force them to relinquish their superpowers. But then, when Assistant District Attorney Allison Monroe attempted to present the terms of said agreement, she passed a document through the null field without proper preparation or treatment. This kind of power-dampening technology was new and finicky at the time, and so this was enough to disrupt the null field, allowing the U-Foes to begin powering up. Before the field could be re-energized, X-Ray quickly escaped and attacked the guards, allowing his allies to do the same. However, in his haste to escape, it seems that Vector pushed his powers too far, too fast, and ended up repelling the fabric of the universe itself. As a result, the U-Foes were shunted out of the Earth dimension and into an interdimensional nexus called the Crossroads of Reality. And as fate would have it, it was there where they once again encountered none other than the Incredible Hulk. You see, in the months since their last encounter, the Hulk had reverted to a state that was even more savage and mindless than ever, forcing Doctor Strange to banish him to the Crossroads. This nexus point contained numerous doors to other realities, and Strange hoped that the Hulk would find a world where he could live peacefully. To help achieve this, Strange also implanted a spell in the monster's mind that would draw the Hulk back into the Crossroads if he found himself in a realm that didn't suit him. Upon one such return trip, the Hulk was attacked by the U-Foes, but this time the Green Goliath was aided by an extra-dimensional entity known as the Puffball Collective. Now, this being was secretly manipulating the Hulk for its own purposes, but in this instance it did help him trap the U-Foes in dimensions where their powers would not be able to help them. X-Ray was sent to a world populated by monsters that fed on radiation. Vapor was trapped on an empty planet with no atmosphere where she was unable to maintain her form. Ironclad was dropped onto a planet where the surface was covered in a soft mud that he quickly sank into, and Vector fell into a realm where a perpetual storm caused chunks of rock to swirl around him, forcing him to constantly use his powers to defend himself. Now, one by one, all four of them did ultimately manage to escape these worlds and make their way back to the Crossroads, but by the time they did, the Hulk was long gone, and the U-Foes had no idea how to get back to Earth. But then one day a portal suddenly opened in front of them, allowing them to get back home. The source of this gateway was not the Crossroads itself, but a Native American mutant named Charles Little Sky. So let's back up and explain a little. Charles Little Sky was born on the Lost Mesa Reservation in New Mexico, but when the elders there learned of his powers, he fled to New York. He was pursued by a fellow superhuman member of the Kisani Nation, Thomas Fireheart, aka the Puma, who sought to bring Charles home. I don't think we've ever really talked about the Puma before, but he was a notable character in Spider-Man books in the 80s and early 90s. In any event, several Avengers witnessed him pursuing Charles and, not knowing the situation, attempted to intervene. Panicked and not understanding his abilities yet, Charles Little Sky inadvertently opened a portal to the Crossroads, releasing the U-Foes. This whole situation culminated with the U-Foes battling Thor, Captain America, Gilgamesh, and the Puma. In this instance, I don't think we need a full play-by-play to understand that, yeah, the villains were defeated once again. However, Charles still didn't trust the Puma and used another dimensional portal to escape. The U-Foes were then sent to the high-security supervillain prison, the Vault, and later took part in a massive breakout attempt that was ultimately quelled by the Avengers and the federal mutant team Freedom Force. The U-Foes did later manage to escape on their own and decided to split up and rendezvous back at one of their hidden bases. However, X-Ray, Vapor, and Ironclad arrived there to find the base wrecked, and Vector nowhere in sight. They checked their security footage and saw what appeared to be Iron Man and the West Coast Avengers killing Vector. Seeking payback, the U-Foes launched an attack on the Avengers' West Coast compound, little suspecting that the footage they saw had actually been fabricated by the god of evil, Loki. In truth, Loki just wanted to manipulate the U-Foes into unknowingly participating in his acts of vengeance, a conspiracy designed to keep the heroes of Earth off balance by making them face unfamiliar threats. Although while Vector was delayed on his way back to the rendezvous base, he did ultimately make his way there and see the same fake video. He reunited with his allies in the midst of their battle with the Avengers, and believing they were outmatched without a solid plan, the U-Foes beat a hasty retreat. After that, Vapor briefly joined an army of supervillain women called the Femizons, but returned to the U-Foes after the plans of that group's leader, Superia, were thwarted by Captain America. Turning our attention back to Charles Little Sky, after escaping from the Puma, he spent several months wandering various dimensions while searching for a path back to Earth. He collected various weapons to defend himself in his travels, but in a realm called the Asta dimension, Charles caught the attention of an alien criminal named Kister. Interestingly, Kister possessed an armored android body that typically belonged to members of the Fraternity of Raptors, an ancient cadre of intergalactic spies with ties to the Shi'ar Empire. Their story is somewhat complicated, but ultimately tangential to this one because Kister was not actually a raptor. Rather, he was a member of the Mahari race who'd presumably gotten his hands on one of the fraternity's crystal amulets, allowing him to inhabit one of their android bodies. But in any event, Kister wanted Charles Little Sky to join his gang of Mahari criminals so that they could use his powers to rob different dimensions. When Little Sky refused, Kister attacked, but in the end Charles was able to use one of the weapons he'd obtained to blast the crystal off of Kister's chest, killing him. Intending on making the best of the situation, Charles peeled the armored pieces off of the dead android body and claimed them for himself. Taking the name Portal, he hid the Raptor amulet in another dimension and eventually obtained a directional mechanism from the Cizelle dimension that allowed him to finally find his way back to Earth. As fate would have it, the moment he stepped out of the portal, he came face to face with someone with similar armor, Darkhawk. Now, at this point, neither of them had ever even heard of the Fraternity of Raptors, and so Portal assumed that Darkhawk was simply another member of Kister's gang and attacked him. In truth, Darkhawk was a human teenager named Chris Powell who stumbled upon another crystal amulet and used his transformations into an android warrior to operate as a vigilante superhero. And in the ensuing battle between the two armored opponents, Darkhawk succeeded in defeating and unmasking Portal. An unconscious Charles Little Sky was arrested and brought to the hospital where he was watched over by Captain America. And this is where we circle back around to the main topic of the video, because while Charles was still recovering and waiting to be transported to the vault, the U-Foes showed up at the hospital with the intention of abducting him. Vector and his allies had learned of Portal's return and wanted to use his abilities to harvest extra-dimensional energy crystals of their own. They were opposed by Captain America and Darkhawk, and while the two heroes were outnumbered, they were soon aided by Daredevil, who just so happened to be nearby at the time. During the battle, Vector and the U-Foes even tried to take a mother and infant child hostage, but fortunately the heroes were able to save the two before either one got hurt. Meanwhile, Portal awakened, and while he didn't exactly intervene, his presence did distract the U-Foes momentarily, and in the end the three heroes were able to defeat the villains. But in the confusion, despite Darkhawk's efforts, Charles managed to slip away and escape through another portal. Maybe we'll talk more about Darkhawk and Portal another day, so let me know in the comments if you want to know more about them, like how the Mahari race later reanimated Kister's corpse by creating their own raptor armor and transforming him into something called Overhawk. Although I will note here that years after that, Charles Littlesky became the Director of Armor, an intelligence agency dedicated to defending the Earth from extra-dimensional threats. He was the one who recruited Aaron Stack, the Machine Man, to help prevent a notorious interdimensional zombie plague from reaching the Marvel Universe proper, which is something we briefly mentioned in my Machine Man video. Of course, in the meantime, the U-Foes continued to make appearances, although they never quite achieved the level of power and influence they longed for. After their failed attempt to capture Portal, they were recruited by the Hulk's nemesis, the Leader. The Leader used them in his scheme to manipulate the Hulk into helping him defend his own base against Hydra, and planned on using the U-Foes as a backup in this, although when he found that their powers lessened his ability to control them, he decided that they were unreliable and locked them up. When the Leader was then seemingly killed by the Hulk, the U-Foes were released by his lieutenant Omnibus and sent to avenge him, but with no personal stake in the fight and the Hulk seemingly stronger than ever, Vector quickly surrendered so that he and his team could survive and escape. Free again and not wishing to repeat past mistakes, Vector, having regained control of his vast fortune, assembled a team of scientists and built a chamber capable of regulating and fine-tuning their abilities, ensuring complete control. The chamber evidently had the capacity to permanently remove any superpowers, but doing so required the subject to willingly sit still for over an hour and just let it happen, making it unusable as a weapon. Vector did meet with a fellow criminal named Crossfire, who believed they could use their brainwashing technology to force their enemies into undergoing the process. But before they could even attempt to capitalize on this plan, they ended up imprisoned at the Vault yet again. There, the prison director, Rosalind Bacchus, had an axe to grind with Crossfire. Short version, before he was Crossfire, he and Bacchus were engaged. But he betrayed her by framing her for murder and the theft of government property, i.e. the aforementioned brainwashing technology. He also faked his own death, and so it wasn't until he resurfaced 8 months later as Crossfire that Bacchus's guilt was called into question. And back to the story at hand, while Bacchus was working as director of the Vault, she sabotaged Vector's partnership with Crossfire, tricking the U-Foe into thinking that his ally had betrayed him. As part of this, she disguised herself as a corrupt guardsman and offered to help Vector and the U-Foes escape in exchange for half his fortune, only to fake her own death and disappear with both the money and his depowering chamber. Over the following 2 years, the U-Foes were in and out of various supervillain prisons, including the Vault, the Big House, and finally, the Raft. After taking part in a massive breakout started by Electro, the villains had finally had enough and wanted to be returned to normal. Although by the time Vector and the U-Foes finally found Rosalind Bacchus, she had already destroyed the depowering machine. Since then, the U-Foes have continued their villainous ways, and while they may not have the same level of fame as their fantastic counterparts, they continue to pose a legitimate threat to the various heroes of the Marvel Universe. But that is all I have for you this week, and thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. I will give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, I do refer to the comments when looking for subjects to put on those polls, so if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know. But that is indeed all I have for you this weekend, so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!